Good morning. It is Friday, and it is the real estate chat for the week. Going to answer some questions, going to recap my week, and really looking forward to figuring out how many questions exactly I can answer today. So let me go ahead and get all set up. Post your questions in the chat. Let's see here. Let me get my disclaimer rolling. And let's go ahead and start off with a little recap of our week. We had a big one last week. We closed on 6 doors, and all of them were really large rehabs, really big. So we have been able to get some really good deals on some of the larger homes in the areas that we invest in. We purchased one for $80,000. It is a 2,700 square foot house. It's massive, really gorgeous, and it needs probably about $40,000 worth of work. People have put absolutely horrible texturing on the walls, so that's going to be a real bear to get rid of. And other than that, I mean, it's such a big house, but it really just needs a little bit of plumbing work, and then paint, flooring. Well, the floors need to be refinished for the most part, and that's about it. So it was a good win. And then another house we bought for a little over $40,000. It's about a 2,000 square foot brick home with a really nice matching brick 2-car garage. So they're going to be really large rehabs. They're both, well, the brick one is in far worse shape than the 2,700 square foot one. But nonetheless, I'm really excited about them. And then those are the two most unusual properties that we purchased last week. For the most part, everything else was the pretty generic 2-bed, 3-bath homes that we buy in the area. But I'm really excited about those two. And let me see, we still have 25 properties under contract. So yesterday, that number was right around 20. But we were able to put 5 under contract somewhere between last night and this morning, which is pretty exciting. We got some really good deals. We've got our first 2% property in a while, just a outright 2%er. We're buying it for $45,000, and it is currently rented for $900 per month. So those are getting fewer and far between. I know a lot of the videos, especially, historically, I say that 2% is the mark that we shoot for. I would say more realistically now, that number is closer to like 1.5%. I would say a lot of times now we're all in for about 75,000, and the property is going to rent out for somewhere between 900 and 1,100. So there's that. But the deals are still good. They still cash flow on the front end and on the back end, albeit very small margins on the front end when we have short-term financing. A couple of times we've been negative on the short term, and we're always going to be negative if the property isn't rented out. But generally, once they get rented, we're either at break even or about $50 per month until we get them refinanced over to that long-term debt. And that's when we're closer to that 200, 300 or more mark from a cash flow perspective. So 25 under contract. Today, there is one property that I believe that we're going to be able to close on. I'm going to push for that. It's pretty simple. Everybody knows everyone, and the property previously closed at the same title company, so it shouldn't be too difficult to push to close today. But that's what I'm really going to try to make that push, because otherwise we will have no properties to close on this week. So this will be the first week all year that we haven't closed on any properties on Friday. But since we've got 25 under contract, I mean, we're definitely going to have big weeks coming up. But this is going to be our first smaller week, which is fine. And then let's see, we are currently up to 274 doors. Oh, also, last week we closed on a property that was built in 1850. It is the 5th oldest home. This is what I've been told by the people that we bought it from. It is the 5th oldest home on the west side of Dayton, which is pretty cool. Brian Reed, what's up, man? Good morning. Congrats. Ryan, do you offer mentorship? I do, in the sense of this live stream. And I also have the mastermind group, the Seek Wisdom Mastermind. Let's see here. I think it's a ticker. So seek-wisdom.com/join. There are 2 groups, Monday at noon and Tuesday at 7 a.m. Those are both Eastern Standard Times. It's $300 per month, and it is an hour per week. There are between 15 and 18 guys between the 2 groups at the moment. There are a good mix of people. Everybody is really hardworking with a big vision and taking steps on a weekly basis to better themselves, become better fathers, husbands, and also build a real estate empire. Now, a couple of guys in the group are not interested in investing in real estate. However, both of them are private lenders. So while they're never one might own some properties himself, but not everybody's end goal is to have a really large portfolio. But at the end of the day, everyone collectively works really hard together. The kind of framework of it is we follow the 12-week year, which is a pretty cool system. And it pretty just much is you set out 2 to 4 goals to accomplish inside of 12 weeks. And after that, the 13th week, you have that week off, and then you hit another 12 weeks again. And that's just to keep you focused, make sure you are accomplishing all the things that you want to accomplish and that you're moving the needle on a weekly basis. And then each week, there are 2 men in the middle. And those guys bring any issues they're having, either personally or professionally. And the rest of the guys in the group will give their feedback and opinions about the issue that they're having and potential ways to solve it. So it's really awesome. As far as one-to-one coaching, I don't do any of that. Really just like a time thing, you know. I love getting on here, and I think this is probably a fantastic bang for your buck since it's free, and since every Friday morning I've got this time made available to answer any questions that people might want to throw by in a complete, candid, and honest way with no fluff. So I think that's pretty cool. And that's just really important to me, to make sure that I'm always just available for people that might not have enough to kind of hire a coach or are just kind of getting used to the waters. Because I mean, I can reflect easily back on when I was trying to leave law enforcement after my wife and I decided that it was really important for us that she'd be a stay-at-home mom, and I was trying to sift through what to do financially. I read tons of books, listened to an excessive amount of people talk on YouTube and other platforms. And at the end of the day, I thought it would be really cool. There are 2 things that I wanted. I wanted some of these people just be made available, not outside of like a massive paywall, just to like ask them a couple of really quick questions. And then everybody says that you should read more, but very few people ever mentioned like what you should read, right? So that really bothered me, and I really wish that people just had like a massive list of books that they've read, whether they would be beneficial to my situation or not. I wasn't looking for like a top 5 books, right? I think when people ask you for your top 5 books, it's like a extraordinarily unfair list, and definitely not all inclusive, right? Like if you read 5 books on the subject, you're likely no better off than before you read those 5 books. It takes a lot more than 5 books to generate any sort of proficiency or expertise on any matter. And consequently, I've kind of concreted this time in my schedule. So every Friday morning, I'm going to be right here. I'll miss a couple of times because, Friday mornings are a great time to start a vacation every now and then. And then I also keep up with that books read list, which is linked in most of the videos descriptions. So as I said, I keep up with it. I think I haven't added the books that I've read in the past 2 years or so. So I need to definitely go back and update that. But yeah, that's all the ways that I make myself available. I have tried previously to get more into like TikTok, Instagram, those type things. But I think at the end of the day, this is my chosen platform. I have no interest in like regularly checking in on anything. I have found as I've been doing this that it is extraordinarily difficult to be like a high performing practitioner and also ever present on social media. So I think it is really cool that I'm able to post things and little clips from these live streams on a daily basis, but posting regularly on Instagram, responding to comments, and being as present as I would want to when I first started is really difficult when I'm also trying to aggressively grow a couple different businesses. So, yeah, there's my explanations on everything. Nora Stocks, happy Friday. Good morning, man. I also had to ask, how did you acquire 5 properties in a day? Like, where do you look to get them? And also, how do you approach probate attorneys, in your opinion? Well, I don't approach probate attorneys ever, so I can answer that one pretty quickly. I've got a realtor that has an in with a couple of different probate attorneys, and they have notified him when they are ready to sell things, but I've never tried to like proactively network or stay in touch with probate attorneys. It might not be a bad idea. I know one wholesaler who keeps an eye on obituaries pretty closely and then tries and tracks down, like, if it's going through probate, what attorney is going to handle it. So that's definitely a good way to get great deals. But it's not something that I've ever done. And then how did I buy 5 properties in a single day? Well, I made a video called The 7 Streams of Deal Flow, in which I outlined just like all the different ways that we regularly find deals. And I had a business coach for a while, and one of the big things that he really encouraged people to do is always have some sort of like lead generation or some sort of stream of new leads finding your business. And he always advocated to have a minimum of 7 of these streams constantly working. And his whole point was, if you don't have those 7 streams of lead generation actively working in the background for you, then your business is likely going to start declining sooner or later. And when it comes to all things sales, lead generation, it's really a numbers game. So, I like pretty much all I do all day, every day is look at deals. And I've had some good laughs with this about with my wife and some good friends lately. And that's that, I enjoy what I do so much that, part of what I do to relax is look through Zillow and Trulia. I am always in the market, monitoring the market, looking at new properties listed, and 3 to 4 other people are constantly monitoring it as well as potential deals to kind of send our way. So always looking for deals. I would recommend, I'm not going to try to recap it now, but I would recommend going back and watching that 7 Streams of Deal Flow video. And then I would also say that one of the things about investing in single family homes is it's a different scenario each time you buy a home, right? There's always different variables and factors at play. But for the most part, it really comes down to just the same math problem. And I was kind of reflecting this past week in that, I've talked to a couple of different guys where they want to go out and do different things. They've tried to tackle different deals, apartment complexes, building new communities like rent to own, getting into like different industries. And it's really easy to get kind of distracted and want to kind of add some variety. But I mean, at the end of the day, I would kind of categorize what I do as like solving the same math problem every single day, multiple times. Like the formula is the same. The actions to take on each deal are exactly the same. And it's really kind of monotonous after a while. But if I stopped doing this same math problem, then the deal flow would stop, the analysis would stop, and our entire business, would kind of stop on the acquisition side. So for each property, I mean, finding a deal is one thing, right? So whatever sort of funnel, whether it's a probate attorney, the MLS, a wholesaler, word of mouth, whatever way that you find the deal, after you are notified of it, you have to first analyze the asking price with the amount that you're going to be able to rent it for. You're going to want to go through and collect how much are taxes on an annual basis, how much are insurance on an annual basis, and then you're going to want to know the market rent and what you're going to be able to rent that property out. And then you're going to solve for that number. And then if that is okay, now you have to go and look at the property, verify the condition, and figure out what all the property needs. And at that point, that's when you're going to go through, you're going to make your guesswork, your loose lists of, does it need a roof? Does it need to be painted? Does it need a new kitchen or new bathroom? And there you just start solving for that formula. And I believe the appropriate formula to buy a property is purchase price plus rehab costs are equal to or less than 75% of the after repair value. Now, once you figure out how much the property is going to be worth, if it were in pristine condition on the market, what I do, which I get that is not possible in all markets, but it's still extraordinarily possible here, is you back off to 75% of that value. So if the property, for easy numbers, is worth $100,000, you're going to immediately know that you're not going to pay more than $75,000 for that. Now, if you need a new roof and that roof is going to cost $10,000, well, now your top dollar is going to be $65,000. And the only reason that 75% is important is after you've purchased the property, after you've rehabbed the property, you're going to rent it out. And then a couple months later, you're going to approach a bank and you're going to do a refinance. So generally, banks want to refinance properties at about 75% loan to value. And if you are right and that you have solved that equation on the front end appropriately, then later on, when you refinance that, you're going to be able to refinance and pull all of the money that you have in that deal back out. So you'll get 25% of that kind of locked away in equity that you can't touch, and all the money that you put into the deal, you're going to be able to pull out. Now, the lower you can get below 75%, the better of a deal it is. And if you are all in at, say, 50% of the appraised cost, then you'll be able to pull some money out. So when you refinance with the bank, you might walk away from the closing table with, a couple grand in your pocket. And as bizarre as that sounds, I mean, once you get in the right market, once you get plugged in, and once you have all these streams of deal flow plugged in, it's definitely a possibility for you. So we recently purchased a property. We paid $64,900 for it. And, a couple weeks after we bought it, it was already rented when we bought it. And it appraised for $165,000. So pretty bizarre and really cool. So now when we go to refinance that, we're going to be able to pull out 75% of that $165,000. Now, since we only spent $65,000 on acquiring it, it does not need any rehab. It's currently occupied. That'll be money that we're going to be free to use to acquire additional properties. Okay, gonna go watch it, man. Yeah, thank you, Andrew Boyle. I don't know about you, man, but I hope all is well. All right, let me get my disclaimer there. Post any questions that you might have in the chat, and let's see here. In the meantime, since we're at the bottom of the questions list, I will, or the statements list, as Andrew Boyle just turned it into. Let me pull up this list of other things that I can talk about. Some of the questions that we may have been asked on the YouTube channel. Let me pull up some recent comments as well, because I saw a couple of good questions come in on the foreclosure video. TR Kobe asked, if you win an auction for a house at $95,000, do you have to have the $95,000 in cash at that moment? The answer really depends on your local municipality and how they handle it. Here locally in Montgomery County, Ohio, last time I checked, you just need to put down like a minimum deposit of, I think, like $5,000. And then you have, a certain amount of time that you have to pay on the back end while you're also, running it through a title company and looking for the appropriate ways or making sure that everything on the title is good to go. So while the county is doing everything right, there could be liens that the county doesn't know about on the property that you are still going to want to look for and examine the title for. So that way you don't win something at a bid and then later learn that there's another lien or claim to your property that you're going to have to figure out how to pay for. So this is one of the main reasons that I think people that have these like how to invest in real estate courses kind of really lose me. Is this that so much about real estate is like a local market and local thing. Like, sure, there are some general things that we can talk about, but each market is its own entity. It's its own kind of puzzle to put all the pieces together. And just because I can do what I do here in Dayton, Ohio, does not mean that tomorrow I can go to San Francisco, New York, even anywhere, somewhere in Michigan, to keep it more similar, and do the exact same thing. There's going to be a lot of learning involved and a lot of groundwork that I'm going to have to do before I would be even moderately comfortable in attempting to do the same thing. And this ties right into another question that we got on the comments, which is foreclosed properties can't be inspected and often have liens. So what is the best way to check properties for liens? Also, how do you find wholesalers or pre-foreclosures that you can and can you inspect these properties? So you're right, foreclosed properties cannot be inspected and oftentimes have liens. So I would say the best kind of process to do is look at the properties best you can from the outside prior to placing the bid, and do as much due diligence on the properties that are on the auction list before the auction as you possibly can. So look around the outside, drive by it, see what kind of condition the outside is in. And then I would just kind of keep a high budget for potential interior issues that might be around. You obviously can't inspect the interior, but I think, and this is, a blanket generality, is that depending on how well the exterior looks, generally the interior is about in the same condition as the exterior is. So it's really tough, but just try to come up with a an amount that you're comfortable with and just put that into your equation. So if you're going to want to, following that formula that I did earlier, purchase price plus rehab costs being less than 75% of the after repair value, as you're analyzing the properties on the auction list, go ahead and figure out what the full retail value, if the property is in pristine condition, figure out what that is. Back off 75% of that, and then subtract a number that you're comfortable with. And now you have your absolute highest bid amount. Some serious cars, some automotive enthusiasts driving by. And then as far as the liens on the properties go, I really wouldn't spend much time, if any at all, trying to figure out how to guess what type of liens these properties have. I don't think it is a good use of your time. So I would suggest, as soon as you win a property, well, first off, I would make sure that your municipality has the ability and allows you to back out of that property or that purchase if there is a clouded title issue or any title issue. If that's the case, then don't give any concern to the potential for liens being on that property until after you win. And then after you win, take your winning bid and the receipt for your deposit over to your favorite neighborhood title company and have them do a title search on that property. And they have the ability to give you title insurance on properties that you win from foreclosures. So that will protect you from any liens that they potentially missed when you buy that title insurance. So that's what I would suggest. And if your municipality does not allow for you to back out of that bid in the event of a title issue, then I would really increase the stakes as far as how you analyze properties and pick out maybe 2 to 3 properties that you really want to bid on, and then go ahead and pay for title searches on those properties. So some title companies might not be a big fan of that. Some might not even allow it, but I think if you dig hard enough, you'll find somebody that's interested in doing like a preliminary title search for you. And that would be pretty solid. I do not think, even though it is possible with technology, to do kind of pseudo preliminary title searches yourself, I wouldn't spend too much time doing that, because that is going to take away from your ability to process the deals that are coming your way. All right. One of the most common questions that I get that I think is really funny is, hey, Ryan, do you know where I can find these cheap off-market Dayton deals? And the answer is they are everywhere. Dayton is by no means an area that is yet saturated with real estate investors. So I think the last numbers that I saw in an article recently posted is there's like somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 vacant homes still in the city. And don't be fooled. The city is not making any effective efforts at solving the problem. I think for this problem to really be solved quickly is we need a lot more investor participation, and we need the housing prices to continue to go up. So, I mean, let's take, I think a lot of these properties that we purchase, our purchase price plus rehab cost, sure, it'll be 75% or less of the after repair value, but the after repair value still isn't even equal to the replacement cost or how much it would cost to build that place new. On most occasions, since the majority of the housing stock of Dayton was built in like the 20s, 30s, up to the 50s, is, not to knock any of the general contractors at the moment. They're working with their big box materials and they're doing the best they can, but craftsmanship was significantly better back then. So a lot of these, I mean, if you're at like a 1,500 square foot house here in Dayton, you've got a massive basement, and it's not uncommon for the replacement cost to be 240, 250. So that house at the moment is probably worth like 120. So we're at like 50% of the replacement cost. So, there are a lot of markets across the nation at the moment where you are paying a premium on top of replacement cost for these properties because of the quote unquote value of the land, whatever, right? Here in the thriving metropolis of Dayton, we're at like 50% of the replacement cost, and you can buy a lot of city lots for a couple hundred or a couple grand. So I don't think we are nearly in as much jeopardy as some of these higher priced markets in the event of a correction, because we're not even coming close to touching the replacement cost. And because we're not close to touching the replacement cost, it doesn't make sense yet for these contractors or developers to come in and tear down places and build new, which is becoming a more common thing in these thriving markets. So we're way behind, and we need all of the help that we can get. So if you are looking for an easy way to get started, you're down the move, I would not suggest anyone at all be an out-of-state investor in Dayton. All of the out-of-state investors that I know that are taking investing in Dayton seriously are either spending a big portion of their time here in the area, they are either relocating here, or they are either getting robbed blind by their property management company. I don't think Dayton is a market where you can easily make money by outsourcing your property management and living in another state. The insurance agency that I have, I'm sure this is going to be the case regardless, but I have a significant number of clients that have been with me for several years now that are out-of-state investors, and they are now selling a large portion, if not all, of their Dayton portfolio. Now, there's a lot of variables that you can arrive to from that, other than they're just not making any money on these assets. Like, the market has increased tremendously, so a lot of people do have the ability to cash out for significantly more than they paid for them at the moment. But in seeing and being familiar with these properties, I'm comfortable with assuming that a lot of these people did not make any money. So endless amount of opportunity here if you are willing to spend a good portion of your time here, diligently look for these vacant properties. And we still have entire streets that you can drive by where each of them are boarded up. So it's a lot of legwork to take one of these boarded up abandoned properties and acquire it, but it's not impossible. So each property is encumbered by past taxes, probably, so delinquent taxes, maybe an old mortgage that hasn't been released, because a lot of these banks have sent all the foreclosure notices to the people. They have moved out. However, the bank never really started the foreclosure process or went through with the foreclosure process because they didn't view that it would be worth its time, because the amount that the property is currently worth is not sufficient to cover the amount of the mortgage that they had. However, old mortgages, I've seen a lot of people release them for kind of pennies on the dollar. So the possibility's there, and the deals are abundant. I would say most of the properties we have within, a couple of blocks, there are a handful of boarded up vacant homes. So after this comment, they joked that I'm buying up all the deals, and that is so far from the truth. I could probably double, triple, maybe even quadruple in size, and that still wouldn't be true. There is a significant amount of opportunity here if you're willing to move, but a lot of people are just not willing to move to this area. There it is. There's that comment. I always search for cheap homes in Dayton. They're always pending. I always say to myself, I bet that it's Ryan Ingram buying up the block. Save some for us, man. It's playful. It's fun. And I appreciate the compliment, but so far from the truth. But that also only pertains to these MLS deals. So if a property is being listed, yeah, it's gonna be eaten up pretty quick. Because for the most part, taking these vacant homes that are encumbered by the back taxes and also potentially mortgages, those are not going to appear on the MLS. Those have generally been abandoned a while ago. So if a property appears on the MLS, there's going to be a lot less legwork there's going to be virtually no legwork in getting that property with like a free and clear title. So they move a lot faster, which is significantly more desirable. But if you came in and felt like becoming a title doctor and spending a decent amount of time to get these properties unencumbered by the things holding them back, then that's a good deal. We've been working on buying a home here in the area, my wife and I, for us, and it is an abandoned house, and it has a little over $180,000 worth of liens on it from the state of Ohio. And we have spent at this point over a year in trying to figure out how to free this property from the current situation it's in. And even if we get all of the back taxes handled and all of the liens released from the property, we still need several $100,000 in restoring it. So getting the title free is going to be the biggest issue. Which I'm just thinking out loud here because there aren't many questions in the comments. So feel free to post those if you have them. But in thinking through how the city could better use its resources, because here on the past couple of streams, I've been pretty critical of the city and not doing the greatest of jobs in helping the market. I think if they could somehow deploy their resources in getting these abandoned properties, the title clear on them, then that would pave the way for investors to come in, buy the housing stock, and make all of these homes kind of functioning units of society again. But I guess after reading that one article that I mentioned a while back, they complained a lot in that the age of the housing stock here in the area is so old. So the tone of that article made it seem like they weren't necessarily interested in salvaging a lot of these older homes because they're just simply old, which I think couldn't be sillier. Jason Clark. What would be a great website wholesale site to buy houses across the US, or how can I get on the MLS listing in New England states? I have no idea. The MLS listings, those are just the ones that are also going to be on Trulia or Zillow. Those are the ones that realtors go to list properties when they are ready to sell. So from that perspective, those aren't difficult to find whatsoever. I would say that those are the easiest and that you already have access to them. I pay attention to Redfin, Realtor, Zillow, and Trulia. It seems like they have new listings appear at different time. So it seems like some are quicker at listing new listings and others are a little bit slower. So I've got notifications set up on all of them because, again, it is just a massive numbers game. And then as far as people listing properties throughout the entire US, I don't think that exists. And if it does exist, I wouldn't trust it. Real estate, in my opinion, is entirely too localized to possibly run effectively on a national level. I would say that any one of these large companies that makes an attempt is going to fail miserably because similar to, well, I don't know what else it's similar to, But, just our local market, in Dayton, it has so many different variables that you need to consider when you are purchasing a home that you can't possibly bake that down into like a mathematic formula that an algorithm could go through. And the only reason that Zillow and some of the other iBuyers, they put up really significant losses in trying to become this national real estate providing thing. And all the wholesalers that I have met that operate in multiple markets do a really poor job at at uh, at selling these local Dayton properties. So I wouldn't trust it at all. In fact, when I get a lot of these emails, I will see that these people, just the way that they word things, I know that they're not local. Like I had one wholesaler who had a relatively decent deal, but he wanted $5,000 earnest money deposit. I don't think there's a single investor here in Miami Valley that would ever give anyone a $5,000 earnest money deposit. So uh, I said, LOL, good luck with getting that earnest money. And that was that. So I would not look for a national solution, nor would I attempt to become a national solution. Even if you familiarize yourself with the different processes of states, you still could not familiarize yourself with all the nuances that are significantly important when considering investing in real estate in your local markets. There are a lot of abandoned units in Cleveland, especially buildings. The land bank is trying to encourage purchasing those. Not sure if the land bank is handling title issues, but this is something I will definitely investigate prior to making a purchase from them. I think the land bank does a really good job at handling title issues, or at least being made aware of them and potentially solving them. And I know that land banks are generally nonprofits stood up in like pseudo government like fashion. They're not the government. They just have the mission to better whatever community they're serving. And generally, they will probably have someone on their board that either currently works with the city or formerly worked with the city. But I would say that the land bank is here locally is pretty choosy about the properties they take on. And while I think the land bank, if ran properly, is one good solution, I don't think that, especially in Ohio, I don't think in any of these areas that have been affected by the automotive industry or just overall manufacturing kind of being on the decline, I don't think the land banks have the bandwidth, the personnel, the funding to tackle these issues with the veracity or the deep pockets needed to truly solve the issue. So, I mean, I think, a lot of the investors that I know here in the area are really, really solid, working really diligently. And while things are in fact improving in the area, we're still not making a dent in all the work that still needs done. So when we're considering a property in East Cleveland, the owner requested $5,000 earnest money. My husband was like, no. Yeah, that's an out-of-state wholesaler for you. Another thing that I've noticed a lot of out-of-state wholesalers do, and from talking about this with the title company, I think states handle this differently. But in Ohio, at least, the buyer has the ability to choose what title company does the closing. And I guess that's not true everywhere. And I've had a lot of wholesalers try and dictate which title company that we use, and I'm not interested in that. So I think the title companies are one of the most integral parts in being a successful real estate investor. I think working with a title company that's got your back, that is willing to, look through diligently these title issues, provide appropriate title insurance. I think that's a really, really big deal. And I think that investors that don't form solid relationships with a particular title company are probably doing themselves a massive disservice. I don't know of a way that you can quantify all of the ways that that is beneficial. And I don't think there's necessarily going to be a return on it. But I know that I have no interest in closing in a title company that is not the title company I close most of the properties with. So that's got to be worth something, right? Ramblin' Ray, newbie question here. Assuming profit margins are good, how much funding should I set aside for reserve repairs on a move-in ready property? I'm in the Dayton area. I think that's a good question. So what I would suggest is you're going to see a lot of websites, books, other people talk about setting aside 10% for capital expenditures and 10% for repairs and maintenance. And I think that is extraordinarily silly and unrealistic because, these capital expenditure items don't care about the percentage that you're setting aside. So if you need a new roof and that's going to be $5,000 and you're sitting there with a property rented out for even $1,000 a month, your 10% for capital expenditures is going to be $100 per month. So, that's 50 months of 10% that you're going to need, assuming nothing else goes wrong, right? So that's going to get you in a little bit of a predicament. So I see a lot of people analyzing properties, putting that in there and thinking that they're being extraordinarily conservative and that they are, preparing for the worst by doing that. And I think that's a bad way to live life. And even like from a pragmatic perspective, when people do put that 10% aside for capital expenditures or repairs and maintenance in their analysis, they don't have a corresponding bank account that is receiving that 10% for capital expenditures or that 10% for repairs and maintenance or that 4% for vacancy. So if you don't have those bank accounts and you don't have a reserve, I think you're just fooling yourself and thinking that you are being conservative and doing the right thing. So while I definitely think you should put money aside on a monthly basis, I think from like a worst case scenario would be not having insurance and experiencing a total loss, right? So anything short of that is not worst case scenario. But I think being conservative and planning for the worst and also being prepared, I think having enough in reserves to replace two of the largest, most costly items on that house is a sufficient reserve to have for that house. So if a roof is going to cost $5,000 and a furnace is going to cost $4,000, then I would want at least $9,000 set aside for that house. And then I would just really hope that both of those things don't happen at the same time. But I think that is a good way to figure out how much money to set aside and be comfortable with it. And I would also say that this is a little bit malleable, and depending on the property, if you know it well, I would budget accordingly. So we have a couple of properties where we know that there are 3 layers on the roof, the original cedar shake shingles underneath, and that's going to be a $11,000, $12,000 roof whenever that time comes. So that may be, that would make me want to increase that number from that 5,000 that I just said to that 11 or 12,000. Also, if you know that you have a new furnace, but the kitchen cabinets are really on the fritz, and that new kitchen is going to cost $6,000 or $7,000 when it's time for you to replace it, then I would go ahead and not worry about the furnace, and I would go ahead and budget for the kitchen to be replaced, and I would use those numbers to factor in your potential reserve. That's a framework that I am significantly more comfortable with than the industry standard, yet, in my opinion, horrible advice of setting aside 10% for capital expenditures, 10% for repairs and maintenance, and 4% for vacancy. In fact, each time we start talking about this, I'm really tempted to go in more detail and discuss that when it comes to real estate investing, the real difference and the real profit centers come from quantity. So the more properties that you own, the easier it will be to take care of all the properties that you own. And I think it's borderline impossible to make enough money to justify owning one rental property. I think you really need to benefit from the law of large numbers or the law of averages, whatever you want to call them. Because essentially, if you are going to take good care of a property, if you are not going to have deferred maintenance on your house, then you're pretty much over the years, you're going to be almost building a new house every 50 or 60 years, right? So at some point, like all houses do, is fall apart. And every single problem a house can have requires money to fix. So if you're truly focused on keeping these properties in tip-top shape and fighting how brutal time is to these and how these mechanicals just don't last forever, you're pretty much going to have to replace the house every 50 years. And I think if you were to take the entire cost, and I made a spreadsheet and it's available in most of the video's descriptions, called the capital expenditures calculator. And what I did was I essentially wanted to know like how much I would need to put aside on a monthly basis in order to have enough money in an account every 50 years to replace everything in the house. So what I mean by that is if a new driveway cost $8,000 and the driveway cost 50 years, then you would want to, 50 times 12 and then $8,000 divided by that number and figure out how much money you need to set aside for a new driveway so that when it runs out in 50 years from now, you would have enough money sitting aside. And if you do that for every single element that goes into a house, then that number is unfeasible for you to set aside on a monthly basis. And that is what causes me to insert this idea of quantity, right? So if you are collecting $10,000 a month across 20 doors, and that's $10,000 is after all of your expenses, like your mortgage payment, your insurance and taxes. If you just got 10,000 kind of free flowing cash flow or whatever you want to call it, if that's your net, then chances are that $10,000 is going to be sufficient to cover any one item or any couple of items that go wrong with those 20 homes that you own. And I think that is the biggest element of being a real estate investor on a sustainable manner. And, when we had fewer than 10 properties, my brother and I, at the end of every month, we had like a very painful conversation of, hey, we each need to put in X amount of dollars in order to cover all the expenses for this month, right? And slowly that number got smaller and smaller as we got additional properties. And then once we were past that 20 property mark, very seldom have we ever had to put in our own capital. And the times that we have had to put in our own capital, it's been because of some, funny circumstances that have nothing to do with like the sustainability of the portfolio. Those are all my thoughts wrapped up into one. We will always go with our own title company going forward. Our current project was purchased from Hubzu, and they recommended their company. And let's just say it has been a nightmare recording. I bet so. I really believe that. And I would love to hear more about your experience with Hubzu. I can't tell you how many homes I've bid on from Hubzu, but I've never met the reserve. So even though in theory I've won multiple auctions, I never won any auctions. Where in the courthouse do I look for a list of foreclosures? I don't think you necessarily have to go to the courthouse, Richard Smith. What I would recommend is whatever county you are interested in, I would type in that county and then sheriff sale. And then hopefully you can find a list that the county regularly updates that have all the properties and the dates that they are going to be listed for auction and the minimum bids. So, especially, post COVID, I don't know if there's any lists kept anywhere. It's probably all online at this point. Um, that's what I would suggest. Whatever county, sheriff sale, and if that doesn't work, after a couple clicks, if you don't find the list, I would do, whatever county, foreclosure list and see where that gets you. But you should be able to find this information online, because I would not by any means say that our county is advanced, the trendsetter technologically, and our list is online. So I would like to think that we're probably in the bottom rung of counties from a technological perspective. I'm happy to share. We bid 3 times after essentially between our realtor and us calling and just asking probing questions. Nice. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I could see from their perspective how working with the same title company across all of their deals provides some sort of synergy to them, since they are a large source of deals. But I wouldn't be interested in playing that game. Their communication is not within reach, and that you get an 800 number that may or may not be answered. The portal you're provided to access the deal is shut down early. Yeah, that sounds. And I think that's a prime example of what I was talking about earlier, when I just don't think real estate on a national level should ever be automated or try to shove into an algorithm or find like one solution, one national solution to certain issues. It's just too much, too many variables. They do, however, provide a discount for early closing. I bet they do. I mean, even then, how about they just charge less? You know, the customer service you are able to get on the phone is very robotic and scripted. I believe it. I'm sure there are people that, were hired to kind of work in like a call center type form that have no underlying knowledge of real estate. And definitely, probably, because that would be a really hard position to hire for. And that's another reason I think that insurance is so unique, is the better you are at it, the less sense it makes for you to not just be doing it yourself. All in all, I would never use them again. Yeah, I believe it. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't win any bids, and I never want to use them again. So I read a book recently that I would highly recommend that everybody read. It's called The Most Important Thing by Howard Marks. And he is kind of like a Warren Buffett. I guess he owns a fund or a company that invests in other companies. And he goes, and another thing that I really liked about this book is it was written in that like 2008, 2009 time period when everything, was just kind of on fire. So it's a really, really solid perspective. And one thing that I've been doing a lot of lately that I'm trying to figure out how to be able to. So I've been reading a lot of books lately by billionaires or people that are familiar, like with macroeconomics and how that relates to investments or whatever. And I don't necessarily know of any books written by like real estate billionaires. I know Sam Zell has one called Am I Being Too Subtle? And he talked a lot about himself in that book and kind of how he built things, but he never really discussed like market conditions or whatnot. Anyway, Howard Marks does a great job about talking about risk, preparing against it, having kind of counterintuitive thinking, uh, the dangers of doing what everyone else is doing, and even thinking along the same lines that everyone else is thinking. He calls it second level thinking, which I've read it twice now, and I don't fully understand even how to explain what he means by second level thinking. But pretty much, it's kind of like having the ability to be a contrarian uh, in like all times, and not just for being a contrarian's sake. So it's pretty difficult. It's a lot of information to sift through because it's an industry that I'm not familiar with at all, the stock market. So there's that. But I think trying to get perspectives from the stock market and then overlay it on top of what I know about real estate investing has just been something that I've given a shot to. But regardless of how big your portfolio is, what your stock holdings are, uh, what you have in retirement accounts, I think the book is going to be pretty helpful to you. The Most Important Thing by Howard Marks. I'll put a link. Most Important Thing. It's got a subtitle. Uncommon Sense for the Thoughtful Investor. Got too many tabs open. That might work. It might not work. There's a lid. They have none. No knowledge. Hello from Japan. That's fun. I just looked up foreclosures in my county. They must be on an even lower rung than yours. They only list in the local papers. That's one way, I suppose. Yeah, it sounds like you're more remote than we are. Well, I guess now you know that you don't have to go to your courthouse to get the list. You just have to pick up a copy of your local paper outside of any given gas station for the low price of $1.25. I bought a newspaper once when I was a kid, and I went to a gas station and I put in a quarter, and then a guy just came from the side and asked me to hold it open for him. And being the kind, nice southern raised gentleman that I am, always courteous and polite, I did so because he was right there. And it wasn't until a couple hours later that I realized I helped that man larcenate that newspaper. He didn't pay a quarter. He also wasn't shy. He didn't just take one. So I helped the man get away with at least 75 cents worth of newspapers. Oh, it's probably not something I should have shared. It's probably some crazy, it's probably somehow old law, still a felony. Probably gonna do hard time for that in the near future. I need to keep my mischievous yet innocent stories to myself. But hey, now you know. Now you got the real dirt on Ryan Ingram. So there's the link. It may or may not work. Let me look for some other comments. So a guy named Chad Wood said, I appreciate you. I have an opportunity to buy a 3-door rental property from a friend, about $50,000. It's my first property. I've never had a home or investment loan. My question is, if you don't mind sharing, what loan would you recommend to buy it? That's pretty easy. If it doesn't need any work, if you can live in at least one of those units, then it's ready for just a normal traditional loan. So you should be able to finance that for very little money down, 5% maybe. If it is completely uninhabitable, then you would not be able to qualify for a traditional loan. And you would need to figure out how to borrow the money and maybe potentially even the rehab costs to get it up to speed. So I would try the traditional route first because that would be the fastest and that would be the cheapest. So a lump sum reserve in advance is key. I'm assuming this could be combined with a monthly set aside rate. Yes, but I'd always be mindful of what the property will need, because the chances of a monthly reserve rate being sufficient to cover something as it happens is unlikely. I think the only thing that the monthly reserve rate that you would be putting in could possibly cover is like a leaky faucet where you just need to replace the faucet or something like that. If there's any sort of real issue anymore, I think, $1,000 is the floor. And I don't think you're necessarily setting $1,000 aside per month, because that would be probably in excess of the amount that is rented for. So yeah, a lump sum in reserve, and then adding to it monthly and being really aggressive with it, the fewer properties that you have, and then the more properties that you get and the more volume that you have coming in on a monthly basis, I think the less exposure you have, because the cash flow would be sufficient to handle any repairs or maintenance or capital expenditures items that kind of come your way. But I would go so far as to say, if you've got probably fewer than 20 properties, you probably really shouldn't touch any of the cash flow. And anything that you have in excess of your expenses, you should really just let it sit there. So I kind of chuckle. Like, I was recently talking to somebody recently, and they told me that they have a friend that now has 3 rental properties, and he quit his job and he's doing this full time. And I thought to myself, that's a really bad decision. There is no way that the numbers work to make that feasible. So he's either dwindling his savings or getting some money from somewhere else that he's not mentioning to anybody else, because that's not a real thing. Or he lives with his parents and has other people pay for most of his stuff. His 3 rental properties might be able to get him some Little Caesars pizza every day. Statute of limitations has got to be expired on that one. I hope so. But felonies don't have statutes of limitations, so who knows? I just hope it's not a felony. All right. Going through some more of these comments. There's so much spam. Just a little side note, if anyone ever acts like me and wants you to reach out on WhatsApp, that is not me. This is fun. Hi, Ryan. We are currently looking to take out a HELOC on our property. We currently have about 80 grand in equity in our current home. Our plan is to use the HELOC for a down payment and repairs on our first investment home. What does a HELOC repayment look like? Would I factor the HELOC payment into my returns equation when I set the rent price? Yes. HELOCs generally, at least for the first chunk, are interest only. So it's one of the cheapest ways to get money because it's not amortized at all. And it's at a really low interest rate because it's secured by your primary residence. So most HELOCs, even now, are probably between 4 and 6%, which, especially when you factor in the fact it's interest only, not amortized, that's really cheap money to where you might owe less than $100 per month. And it's similar to a credit card in that if you don't utilize the money, you don't owe any interest on it. So if you've got an $80,000 home equity line of credit, then you only use 5% of it. Well, $5,000 of it. Well, you're only paying the interest only on that $5,000, which is a very small amount of money. So in the event that you have a decent amount of equity in your home, I would highly recommend that you get a line of credit and utilize that to acquire and rent out or acquire and rehab properties. Fantastic idea. The only thing that I would say is, if it's your primary residence, a little bit different. You've got like a 10-year payback period, which makes it not necessarily a long-term loan, but maybe one of those mid-range short, but not short-term either. I would just be cautious of acquiring long-term assets like properties with short-term debt. Short-term debt is more like for working capital. In the event that you don't have enough in reserves to pay for something, then a short-term like line of credit would be a beneficial way to make up the difference while you then repay that line of credit with your monthly cash flow or the amount that you're putting into the reserve. I'd be very, very cautious of using short-term debt to acquire long-term assets. Most people that are giving you short-term capital don't want the money to be out there for too long. So if you run into any issues with the banks, any seasoning issues, or anything else, really, then you might be a little bit exposed as you have, your home, your primary residence, kind of that HELOC tapped out at the acquisition of a long-term asset. So do it quickly if you're going to do it. Put a heavy emphasis on speed. Just popping in. I talked about you recently. I read one of your comments so far today about you thinking that I bought up all the properties on the MLS. I think, just to paraphrase, I said that even if I bought at 4 times the rate, or maybe even 5 times, I still wouldn't put a dent in all of the opportunity that is here in the area. But, also to your point, it's not likely that a lot of the opportunity ever make it on the MLS because it just takes so much legwork to clear the title issues with a lot of these abandoned and vacant homes. But yeah, thanks for popping in. This is a marathon, not a sprint. That's one of my least favorite pieces of advice ever. People must understand that prior to getting in. Yeah, I agree. Oh, okay. I completely agree with you. This is in response to that fella quitting his job after he got three rental properties. Yeah, I would say, and that's where I think the internet and these gurus really do a disservice, is they make like really short-term promises, like retire early and whatnot. Retire early is in, a decade or so, not anytime soon. A lot of the ways that money is made in real estate, your appreciation, your principal pay down, and the tax benefits, those are not things that you can actively spend or feed your family with. The cash flow is, but the cash flow is generally a couple $100 per month on paper. But in the event that anything goes wrong from a capital expenditure or repairs and maintenance perspective, even if you're quote unquote cash flowing $200 or $300 per month, then a roof, which can cost upwards of 10 grand, well, that takes out, like 5 years of your quote unquote cash flow. So retiring early on a couple properties or being able to make consistent cash flow on a couple properties, I don't think it's very realistic. Now, over the long term, building wealth and increasing your net worth on a couple properties, very much so. But you're going to be putting in on a monthly basis pretty regularly in order to sustain those properties. So one of the things that I want to talk about, which is a situation that I have come into recently, and since I'm putting stuff out here on the internet about how to be a real estate investor, how to buy a lot of homes, the necessity of like raising rents and being mindful of cash flow. These are things that are extraordinarily important, but there are also some things that potentially attract a lot of like negativity or people that are a little bit frustrated with, the whole existence of landlords. So I've heard a bunch of things like, landlords are, parasites and a whole bunch of other stuff, which, I get it. And there are some horrible, real estate investors out there that 100% destroy the property by deferring maintenance and, refuse to fix things that make for strange or harsh living conditions for the person living there. But that would be by no means fair to make that assessment about everyone across the board. So those comments are kind of easy to write off. They obviously stem from some sort of personal experience with one of these unfortunate real estate investors, right? And it's not like the people that are real estate investors like these people either, right? They bring down the values of the community. The broken window theory is definitely a real thing. So if one property looks to be in really rough shape, then perhaps other people on the street will stop taking such good care of their properties. Things like that are a little bit contagious. However, here recently, I have answered a lot of, or come across, collected, been a magnet for a couple of different complaints about like gentrification and people being displaced from homes that they have lived in for quite some time. And in one of these conversations, I said, because they were saying, gentrification comes in, these people come in, these investors, they make the properties, the values go up tremendously. And then the people that have been there for a very long time now have higher taxes because everything has kind of gone up around them and they can no longer afford to live there. And I could see how someone could come to that conclusion. But my initial response to the individual was, they're not displaced without being compensated for it. So in the event that the property values increase around you substantially, then even if you have made no repairs and put in no money to your house, the value of your home is also increasing. The tax assessed values, the county is, I think most counties are pretty fair in the way that they assess the taxes. And when I say that, I would say that the tax assessed values are generally always substantially lesser than the actual market value of the property. So taxes are one of those things that you kind of always have to pay. And since we live in a country that has an inflationary currency, then it's just true across the board that since our dollar is inflationary, people on fixed incomes will steadily have less and less buying power. So, one of my main responses to this was, first off, kind of a rising tide raises all ships, or whatever that saying is. If the home values around you are going up, then that means yours is as well. And, also, because our system, because capitalism is the way it is, because our dollar is inflationary. And, even if you were to kind of unseat capitalism, if you don't replace the currency with something that's not inflationary, then everybody on fixed incomes will get lesser and lesser purchasing power. So essentially, everybody is playing this game, and everybody is trying to beat inflation. And even if you don't want to play this, even if you don't like talking about finances or whatnot, it doesn't excuse you from what's happening at hand. You're still going to get less and less purchasing power. So you kind of always have to be mindful of staying ahead of inflation. And in heavy inflationary times like we are in right now, it is really tough to do when you're experiencing double-digit inflation. I mean, we're all feeling it at the moment at these gas pumps. So, as I started talking about these things, the gentleman that I was talking to kept making this hypothetical situation worse and worse, and saying that, well, I'm talking about like a really old lady who is, barely able to, afford to like get her house painted and not really address anything like that. And I think, kind of like we were talking about earlier, these homes, you pretty much have to replace it every 50 years. And if you are not actively putting money into your property, then your property is actively falling apart. And, while nobody is comfortable or even moderately interested in this hypothetical sweet old lady losing her home, if she's unable to afford to take care of it, the elements of this world are going to cause her to lose her home. Because as time goes on, more and more issues are going to happen, with this property. So in the event that so let's put some numbers to this so I can stop speaking hypothetically on this. So let's say that the property was purchased for $40,000. That's a common number here. A lot of people 20, 30 years ago purchased their homes for about $40,000. And now let's say they're worth $200,000. All the neighboring homes are worth $200,000. If she put $40,000 in this house and she paid it off over time, her total exposure is $40,000. If she never got any kitchen upgrades or really upgraded anything, but she's kept really good care of it, the inside is lived in really well and respectably, and the houses around it appreciate to $200,000. The scenario that the gentleman painted for me was that these investors are going to give her, $30,000 for her house, whereas the other ones are selling for like $200,000. Well, the ones that are selling for $200,000 have new everything: new mechanics, new plumbing, new kitchens, new bath. They're brought up to speed, probably new roofs. This one does not. So it goes back to that formula of the purchase price plus the rehab is equal to or lesser than 75%. So, if any investors that follow along with the school of thought that I have, then what you would do is you would take that after market value. You would take the 200,000, you would come off it to 75% of 200,000. So you'd be at 150,000. And then you would subtract all of the things that property needs. So if it needs a new roof, new kitchen, new bathroom, all of these things, then you would just subtract that from the 150. And every market is different, especially the labor and material costs. So I don't know what it costs to completely redo a house in the area that you're in. But using that formula, let's say that the house needs $60,000 worth of work. A fair price to offer would be $90,000 on that house. So if it's free and clear, she bought it for $40,000. She never did any of these capital expenditures, and she's just barely squeaking by. Again, if she's not able to afford the upkeep of the home, she's going to lose it either financially or from nature and time taking its course. So getting paid $90,000 on a house that you have $40,000 total into is not displacing someone from their home without appropriate compensation. So I am one, and again, this is a self-assessment of myself, but am always interested in doing the right thing for all parties involved. And I have no interest ever in taking advantage of or exploiting anyone. And kind of one of the lifelong sentiments that I want to impart into my children, into everyone that I work with, is we always make money at the service of others, never at the expense. So when I hear things like this, I want to take them seriously. I want to hear out the complaints. I want to see both sides fairly and come up with some sort of happy medium. If it's truly a situation of people getting displaced from their homes, then and not being appropriately compensated for it, well, that's an injustice that needs to be kind of appropriately remedied, right? But at the end of the day, I've found that a lot of these complaints come from sources that don't necessarily have all of the information appropriately. Like that fellow's claim of this house worth, that has never been worked on is now going to be taxed as a $500,000 home. Well, that's not true. And that's why one of the things in tax assessments is they go around and they do little windshield appraisals. They take pictures of these properties. If one is in horrible condition, it's not going to be valued the same as one that's pristine. That's the way that the county kind of insulates this from happening. So, you got to consider that. And then, when we were discussing this, he went on to say, well, they don't necessarily have the same financial education. They don't have access to the same resources to kind of know how money works and to know that it's inflationary. And while that may have at one point been true, since the invention of the public library, the internet, YouTube, where you can find a significant amount of people sharing their opinions about things, billionaires writing books like the ones from Howard Marks that I just wrote. I mean, these books are all easily digestible and applicable. And, we have never had more access to information than we do now. And I think that anyone moderately interested in keeping up with their finances has more than enough knowledge and information at their resources or at their disposal. So those are all of my thoughts. I've been spending a decent amount of time kind of digesting these things that I just said. So I'm sure there's still plenty of fault with this, but I'm still just thinking out loud and trying to figure out how progress can be made, houses can be restored, and everyone win in the process. So shortly after this conversation, I went to go look at a home that I was offered from a wholesaler. And you guys are all familiar with the prices now in Dayton. So let's talk about this. The house is currently rented. It's a lady, she's in her 70s. The house is rented for $450 per month. Market, it's a 3-bedroom, 1 bath. She lives very respectably on the inside. Everything is really well taken care of. She said that she's lived there for probably close to like 12 years, definitely longer than a decade. The market rent on that house is at least $950. It could be more depending on how that property is restored. Her complaints are the windows. They're all the old windows. They're the single pane wooden windows. The carpet, all the floor coverings in there are not good, and the roof needs replaced on that property. The roof was on its last leg about 5 years ago. So, she also shared that, she's on a fixed income and she's making $800 per month. So she cannot possibly afford a rent increase. And this is one of the things that I have found is that she said that as soon as she moved in there, her and the owner of the property became extraordinarily good friends. And he has never raised the rent on her, right? So I don't know much, but I think 450 even 12 years ago was probably a little bit under market. So it was a great rate from beginning. But, the person that owns this property, they're not collecting enough to possibly make any repairs on the property. So the property, all the maintenance that ever comes about on that is deferred. The owner can't afford from that property, from the proceeds of that property, to care for it. And her income is not one that the rent can be raised whatsoever on her. It's a 3-bedroom house. I would say that she lives in significantly less than that. She said she used to have kids there that she raised and that lived there, but they're all moved out now. So as I was trying to think through, and again, with the recency bias of that conversation that I had, how can this possibly work? And I could not come up with anything. So, I even told her that because she wanted to know if I bought it, would I raise her rent? And it's just like, well, we would be losing money on this house if we were to buy it and have it rented out at $450, because we would have a mortgage payment, we would have taxes to pay, and we would have insurance. All that collectively, we would probably be losing $100 to $200 per month with that rent being the way it is. So we would not also be able to make the necessary repairs, pay for the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, and also not increase the rent. So it's in a really, really tough predicament. And essentially, I don't know what the possible answer could be, but I wouldn't necessarily call that displacing someone from their home. But I mean, time changes, inflation happens quick. And there are certain expenses that increase, regardless of kind of how good you pay, how good you take care of the property. Like no matter, the taxes and the insurance, those increases that we experience every year, they are in no way tied to our performance, right? They're tied to the fact that from an economical perspective, our dollar is inflationary. So those are all my thoughts on that. I don't know if you guys have any solutions, but there we go. Good morning, Eric. Happy to meet you. That's a cold truth that folks have a hard time facing. Exactly. They start giving hypothetical scenarios and they keep getting worse and worse. Bought my first rental this year. Anything I should keep in mind for tax season? You're probably going to get a little bit of a discount. You got 27 and a half or 28 and a half. I can never remember I can never keep them straight. Years to depreciate the purchase price of the house. And you're also able to write off essentially any of the dollars that you put into the property. So your taxable income should decrease a little bit by owning the property. So congrats. And, what we found is we used to be able to walk into kind of any tax office and they would do a great job at preparing our taxes. And at one point, we could even do our taxes by ourselves. With one or two properties, rental properties, you could probably walk into most places and they treat you appropriately and make sure everything is done right. But as you keep acquiring rental properties, I would just be mindful that the number of potential people that you can use to prepare your taxes is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And as that pool gets smaller, it will be significantly more expensive for you to do things the appropriate way. Most real estate investors that I know keep horrible books. That's something that I would be very mindful of from the beginning. I would keep track of every expense and associate it with a particular property, especially in the single family home space. So it gets really time consuming to keep books in the appropriate fashion. So I would just go ahead and start bracing yourself as you continue to acquire rental properties that you can expect a higher and higher and higher bill for preparing your taxes. Which is funny because your tax bill will also get lower and lower and lower as you decrease your active income by acquiring additional real estate. However, you will pay increasingly more property taxes the more properties you get. So that's what I would keep in mind. You seem like a smart, realistic person. What's your thought on the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad? I'm currently reading it. I like that book a lot. I think my biggest takeaway from that book that I, kind of use on a daily basis, this might be a little bit of an overshoot. One thing that really helped me in my journey from going from law enforcement to kind of being a business owner is, I don't know, I don't think I've ever seen your name on any of these live streams. So I'm going to assume that you don't know my story. So I was in law enforcement in 2017. My wife and I had our first kid, and it was really important for us that she be a stay-at-home mom on my law enforcement salary. We could not do that without becoming like a paycheck to paycheck type individual. So I have always kind of considered myself probably a little bit egotistically as a high performing individual. I've always felt like I have the ability to achieve what it is that I set my mind out to, or at least come close. So I was really kind of confused when I realized that I couldn't provide for my family financially the way that I wanted to, and that the wife and how my wife wanted us to. So I decided to set out and read one book per day until I figured out how to make significantly more money. And one of the first breakthroughs that I had was from Robert Kiyosaki, but it was not one of the ones that are commonly talked about. And that is that he kind of posited this idea that money is not real. And he said that he said that multiple times, or wrote it multiple times. I really don't know. And that made me really frustrated because it's just like, okay, if money's not real, then, and all of my problems right now are financial, then this rascal is telling me that my issues are in fact not real. And, I really had like no formal education or no experience with finances that were even moderately helpful. So I actually made it the background on my phone for a really long time and I kind of made it the background, and that's just the text that says money is not real. And because I wanted to keep that top of mind while I could have possibly brought myself to understand why he was saying that and what it really meant. Because if money is not real, then he's got a lot of something that I clearly don't have, right? So I really appreciate Robert Kiyosaki in that manner. And I think, I think he has, while he's definitely played a significant role in me understanding the way that money works and how to make more of it, I would say that if you listen to any one person for too long, then you kind of develop like a lopsided view, or you're just not doing yourself any justice or favors. Like if you only listen to me about real estate investing, the chances of you living where you invest, investing only in single family homes and trying to build up a community is pretty high, because that's like, kind of my mission and the goalposts that I have for myself. I'm not necessarily interested in doing anything else. So I think Robert Kiyosaki is really important. I think he's one aspect of this financial picture. I think Rich Dad, Poor Dad has a bunch of really awesome kind of fundamentals that it outlines that you don't necessarily hear put in the same manner. I really appreciated the quadrant that he kind of laid out, in that, poor people buy liabilities when they first get their money, and rich people kind of buy assets first, and then rich people spend the money that their assets make, not the money that they make. So I think that was pretty insightful. And then for a while, I remember I had the goal of spending as little money as possible on anything that didn't in turn make me money. So at one point, when I first left law enforcement, I took a sales job selling life insurance. And there were a couple of months where I made 20 grand. A lot of months I made 10. But at that time, my wife and I were living off of about $2,000 per month. And that's everything. That was our mortgage. That was our insurance. That was our food. And that took a lot of work to do, but it was really beneficial in that I was investing and I was buying properties with all of the money in excess of that. So those were the big takeaways and how I took action on them. And circling back to the money's not real aspect, I would say that my understanding of that statement is, at this point, that money is not just this thing that you should go out and make. Like, it is kind of the lagging indicator of value provided to the marketplace. I think people have, this isn't true across the board, because people are extraordinarily valuable to society without getting appropriately compensated for it. Like teachers, nurses, first responders, military, those kind of are in this like vortex, right? But on the other hand, you've got people like Jeff Bezos, who with Amazon, internet shopping used to be a pain, where you would have to wait several weeks to get whatever it is that you ordered. And now pretty much everyone in America can get whatever they want to from the internet inside of 2 days. And Mr. Jeff is the one that we could thank for that. So in that sense, the value that he provided, the problems that he solved, were large enough to then become, one of the wealthiest people around. So, the concept of money's not real shifted my mindset from, I'm not after a dollar amount, I'm after providing particular values to society. And then that kind of bled into the way that people make money. There's a couple different ways to do it. And pretty much everybody that's trading their time for money is going to run out of time before they have the amount of money that they were hoping for. So it's always best to decouple your time and your money. And that can be done in a myriad of ways. So look at that. That was a lengthy answer about what I think about the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Good morning. Thank you for the content of your channel. Thank you, S. Hibbert. I really appreciate you saying that. Good morning. How long did it take you to remove a cosigner off a loan? Well, I don't think you can without refinancing, especially if we're talking about real estate loans. So if you get like a 30-year fixed loan and you have a cosigner, then unless you make changes to that loan, i.e. refinance, that cosigner will remain on that loan. So you could work with a lender and you could do like a rate and term refinance, but if like right now, like if you had a cosigner on a loan a year ago and rates were, sub 3%, and now rates are 5%, I don't know. It'll be between you and that cosigner as to whether or not you want to increase the rate just to remove them from the loan. If it's important to them that they be off it as quickly as possible, then I would respect that and go with a higher rate. But if they're pretty indifferent, and if it's just kind of like a pride thing for you that you don't want a cosigner on your loan, I would maybe try and put a dollar amount on your pride and see if it's worth it. Because the higher monthly payment and the increased rate, especially over 30 years of you paying that minimum, that's going to be a 5-digit number, probably, maybe a little bit more depending on the loan size. So I'd be careful. Would you ever start putting some rental income into an index fund? No. If so, at what point? I would not. I have zero interest ever in, and this, again, just like I mentioned about how you probably shouldn't just listen to one person because it would make you a pretty lopsided individual. This is where I think I have a massive wall border thing that I will not come down on. And that is that I have no interest in ever having any money anywhere where I don't have some sort of control or the ability to inject myself and potentially fix things if they go wrong. So I have no interest in having stocks. I have no interest in having any, crypto, whatever other thing there might be. I am confident in my ability. I'm confident in the business model that I'm doing. The money that I have that I want to invest, I make private loans to other people at fixed rates. And I do that because in the event that they default, I get whatever the security is. Same as whatever else. I don't get a big, sorry, you knew the risks from Wall Street, right? And then I would double down on my own statement because it's my opinion, and I'm the flawed individual that came up with this flawed opinion. And that's that I would say the world, especially America, would be a better place if more people took positive control of their finances rather than blindly investing in index funds or the stock market. Because I think we have enough data behind us at this point to see that Wall Street does not have the best interest of the common American in their place. So if you have the ability as the common American to not funnel off your excess capital into 401ks or IRAs or employer-sponsored, government-sponsored retirement vehicles, and you have the ability to access your capital, lend it out to the community that you care about, to people that you trust on things that you can do better in the event that they don't do what they say they're going to do, I think we would be a much more stable, reliable, better place to live in, right? I don't think like 2008, when a lot of people that were retiring age, when their portfolios went down 40% and all people had to say was, sorry, you knew the risks. I never want to be in that position. I never want to lose a large portion of my wealth with nothing to show for it. So index funds, stocks, the things that have no underlying assets or accountability, if things go wrong, I wouldn't do it. I would challenge every single person that cares enough to figure out how to roll over whatever retirement funds you have from previous employers into a self-directed account. And I would urge you to get plugged in enough to your community to find small business owners, to find small real estate investors, local real estate investors, and come to some mutually beneficial and agreeable terms to lend them money to. Now, I know this is going to be something that you need to read up on, that you need to educate yourself on, but I think your community would definitely be better off for it. So on that same note, if you are an employee and you are getting a like an employer sponsored or an employer match on a retirement account, then I would potentially do it. But then it becomes a math problem of if you take your money and invest it somewhere local, like I know, for example, pretty much most real estate investors in most market would be down to take on 10 to 12% interest only first position mortgages on properties that they want to rehab, because banks are not kind to properties that aren't habitable, that need some sort of renovation done. So I would say you can assume that getting a 10 to 12% return with a local investor is pretty easy to do. Now, I wouldn't go flying off the handle and just giving that money to anybody. Like, there's a lot of due diligence involved. I'm just trying to paint this picture appropriately. So it then becomes a math problem of if you take your 5%, don't give it to that retirement sponsored plan. You have a self-directed IRA you're putting that money into and you're lending out on your own terms. Are you going to make more money there than with this, 5-10% match, whatever it is, plus the risk of investing in something that can drastically decrease without you having any tangible assets attached to it? So that's about everything I have to say on that. I think I covered all my bases on what I would tell people and why I would never have any money on anything outside of what it is that we have control over. So and I mean, if you're somebody that just wants some return on your capital and you don't want to think about money and you want to go on living your life, there's still the community, your local community, your local business owners and investors could benefit far more than you just funneling that off to Wall Street for them to give to anybody in the good old buddy system of theirs. Hey, the credit solutionist. Thank you. Thanks for all this info. Do you ever do meetups or tours of Dayton for out-of-town investors? I don't. I have a meetup that I do every Friday morning before this call. Some local real estate investors meet up at my office, and we have a good old time. I wouldn't necessarily say that the conversation is always about real estate investing, but there's a lot of camaraderie there. So I say that's good. And yeah, I've never done a tour of Dayton. I've done a tour of Dayton for some of the private lenders that we work with as they come up here. And I get really pumped up. I love showing people the community. So I don't know. That would be fun if I had all the time in the world, plus all of the skills necessary to coordinate a tour. Then I think that would be fun to do. But I am not known for my ability to plan or be in charge of gatherings. So I don't think I'd be the right one for that. Hello, Ryan. I've been following your channel for a while. Great content. Thank you. I'm in Nevada, but would like to invest in Ohio due to the low prices. How bad is the vacancy rate? How long does it actually take for you to rent your properties? Well, there's a realistic answer, and then there's a pride answer. The pride answer is we offer an above average product for an average rate. So ours go faster than normal, but realistically, it probably takes a week and a half to rent a property out. Sometimes if it's got some bizarre variables to it, and by that, I mean, if it's directly next door to one of the several thousand vacant homes in the area, it might be on the market a little bit longer. If it's got something funky about it, like some of the houses here don't have any off-street parking, that is a deterrent to the average person looking for a place to stay. But if it's got all the all the things that people want, it will rent out very quickly. There was some article written in Dayton Daily News not long ago that said by 2024, there needs to be like 3,800 new rentals available to meet market demand. I don't know where these people come up with this kind of stuff, but that's what they said. And it's funny because we're sitting on a pile of about 10,000 vacant homes. So there's an ample amount of opportunity here. I said this earlier on the stream. I don't think you were here yet, but I have an insurance agency as well where I write the insurance for a lot of rental properties here in Ohio, and a lot of them are out-of-state investors. So I am pretty familiar with a lot of out-of-state investors. And I would say it's really tough. I would say Dayton is tougher than most markets to be profitable as an out-of-state investor. All of the really successful out-of-state investors that I know spend a really big chunk of their time living in Dayton. Many of them have smaller homes that they Airbnb when they're not here and that they stay in when they are here. So I would say that if you're serious about investing in Dayton because you are very attracted, and understandably so, to our prices, then I would recommend that you either move here or live here at least part-time so that you can keep an eye on everything yourself, not just blindly trust these property managers. I recently purchased a property for a greatly reduced price from an individual that I know that's an out-of-state investor, and he was getting the absolute runaround from everybody on this property. And I couldn't quite understand it. He called me in a real big tizzy saying that he needs to offload this property as soon as possible. He said he cannot keep people out of the property. People keep breaking into it and stealing stuff. And he had a property manager go in and like screw the door shut, which, you know, that's fine. That makes sense. And I guess during the time the person moved out, it is in a rougher spot of town, but some people stole the appliances. They like unhooked the furnace and the water heater, and it looked like they started trying to steal those as well. So he was really panicked. He went to a wholesaler first who had it under contract, and the wholesaler was telling him that the property, so I guess the wholesaler got a hold of this fear and this panic in this guy's voice, which wasn't hard to do. But the wholesaler then started telling him that like all the windows were broken out of this property. And it's just, you know, I guess just trying to drive the price down. But that was a lie. Now, granted, he is many states away, but and he couldn't check on it. But none of the windows were broken out. So I'm not trying to paint a picture of Dayton where everybody lies to out-of-state investors, but without some significant things in place, I think it would be unfoolish not to prepare yourself to do that. So the people that I know that are successful out-of-state investors, they spend a good deal of their time here, and they also have very, very strong relationships with people kind of that serve as like third-party authenticators of sorts, right? Like a handyman not associated with the property management company, or a contractor not associated with the property management company. They can go in and confirm what things have or have not been done. But it's tough. It's tough. So I would say investing in this area is significantly easier if you are local, but it's also still pretty hard if you are either local or out of state. So there's all that. But we definitely have some mighty fine homes for some very desirable rates. We purchased a 2,700 square foot home this past week, and we bought it for 80 grand. It needs about 40 grand worth of work just because it's so big. And I mean, that's really cool. You know, it's a really big house for not that much money. Can you invest in properties with Social Security income? I guess so. I don't know anything about Social Security income. I don't know at what threshold it gets taken away or for what income levels it gets taken away. But I definitely think that Social Security income should kind of be used in a manner that Well, it depends. I don't know. I don't know anything about this. But yeah, I mean, if you've got cash flow to invest in properties, I would suggest that you should invest it. Let me read this thing fully first because you're undercover. Yeah. Let me block you, you silly fella. I've heard of folks housing the homeless in their vacant homes as security in exchange for living in the place. No. And you can't house the homeless. You can't do it. Because if you house the homeless, they're not homeless. Also, it's an overall bad idea because a lot of times vacant homes don't have utilities. Oh, boy, the credit solutionist. This is a really complex thing to work through because if you house the homeless, they're not homeless. And if a vacant home has someone living in it, then it's not vacant. But no, I guess the overall sentiment of leasing places to someone that don't have the functionings of a working home as security, I've never heard of that, nor would I recommend it. Thank you for your answer, Ryan. We'll definitely take it into consideration. Thank you. Ryan got a heckler. I'm always really impressed at at how few and far between that happens. Except on TikTok. When I was on TikTok for a little bit, man, I tell you what, I got a lot of people really quick. I think I got up to like 30 or 40,000, which that's pretty cool, especially on TikTok. Having that many people on any platform is pretty cool. But the amount of negativity on that platform, goodness gracious, I don't have the bandwidth, the energy, or even definitely don't have the desire to put in the effort to sift through all that nonsense to figure out who I was actually helping, if I was actually reaching anyone at all. So I got off there real quick. I really appreciate the YouTube crowd. I think one of the reasons that TikTok was a little bit of a different feel is I think on TikTok they just put videos in front of everybody, and like here on YouTube, like in order to find me, you really have to be looking for things regarding real estate investing. So I think, especially since I'm such a small channel still, it's not like I'm the most recommended video for anything that you type in. So if you're going to come and heckle on this channel, then you really have to want it. It's either it's either because you just really want to. I don't know. I mean, 18,000 followers on our subscribers on YouTube is a really small number for most YouTube channels. So I shouldn't even be in the top 10 to 15 or even top 50 of choices of people to choose to try and get a point across. But on some of the videos on my channel that have a decent amount of views, like the foreclosure one, that has some people saying some nonsense similar to what we were talking about earlier about taking advantage of people that are lesser. And I think on that particular video, it's even a little bit more concerning because, like, we live in a world where decisions and actions have consequences. And most people don't get foreclosed on the first time they miss a payment, or even the second or third time they miss a payment, right? So I don't know who's taking advantage of who in that situation. If you're not making the payments as you agreed to make the payments, then it's kind of like you're taking advantage of the people that were kind enough to make the loan. So who knows? But that's what gets really difficult. It gets really difficult if you got a stick on your shoulder, or whatever the saying is. Chip on your shoulder, not a stick. If you got a chip on your shoulder, then The world is full of opportunities for you to find out and verify and validate that you've got that chip on your shoulder. Well, now that I've rambled about tons of philosophical things today, large, not necessarily question-related topics, I think it's more of an under-the-table kind of thing. Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't do it. We've been doing this for 2 hours. Got 9 people on, 10 people on. This is good. This is solid. I'll tell you what, though. I think I'm going to wait around for a couple more questions. And if you guys don't have any, I will skedaddle or skadoodle. How much is closing costs normally in Dayton? You know, a lot of closing costs are fixed costs like appraisals, origination fees, stuff like that. So it's really tough to say. I bought a house a couple of years ago for $28,000, and the closing costs ended up being about 10% of the purchase price. So it was about $2,800. And that was me using the traditional lender. In the event that we buy something in cash, generally we end up paying about $800 for closing. But then on our refinances, especially if the banks charge origination fees so that they could pay their originators, then it can be pretty steep. I would say 0.5 point to 2 points is pretty common. Alrighty. Well, hey, I sure do appreciate all of you. Feel free to send in an application if you feel like joining the mastermind. And feel free to download the Ingram rental calculator. That's an app that you can use to analyze properties. And then also feel free to just leave comments on videos as they're released. So I sure do appreciate it. I will talk to you guys next week, next Friday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. See you then.